Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we're going to look at some of the top free agents left in the Major League Baseball offseason and whether or not they're a fit for the Philadelphia Phillies.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air over at 97.5 The Fanatic doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for 5 years now. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons, and this is the 3rd season of me hosting Locked On Phillies. Thanks again for joining us. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to this in podcast form. And if you're checking us out on the YouTube, or if you're going to check us out on the YouTube in the future, I'd appreciate it if you did. And if you do, hit that subscribe button, go to the Locked On Phillies channel, and just hit that button in the upper right. It gets you notifications when new episodes are posted, and it's the number one way to say thank you for the content here on Locked On Phillies. It's the number one way to stay updated, but also it really, really significantly helps us out here on Locked On Phillies and the Locked On Network. So I appreciate everyone who's done that and everyone who's going to do that. Today, we are going to do a bit of housekeeping because we've reached that point between Christmas and New Year's where you're probably not working, and a lot of people around baseball are kind of slowing down a little bit to enjoy the holidays before things ramp back up. So the first thing we're going to get into is we're going to look at some of the top free agents available around baseball, like guys that have not signed yet, that are still out there looking for their next team, or maybe looking to come back to the Philadelphia Phillies in a couple of instances. We're going to discuss who's a fit and who's not, and it'll give you a good idea of what the top tier of free agents looks like now that we're pushing the new year and getting ready to head into 2025. We're also going to discuss if there are any more big moves coming for the Philadelphia Phillies, if we should expect them to happen at this point in the offseason. And we're going to wrap up with a look forward at some upcoming Major League Baseball offseason dates. That's the thing. New Year's, you kind of got to get an idea of the lay of the land of what's coming your way in early 2025. And it's a good time to collect your thoughts and build your schedule out of what the big days are around baseball that you need to be aware of as we move slowly towards spring training in the 2025 season. So let's start with this list of the top free agents first, because the Philadelphia Phillies, they haven't really done all that much. As far as major league contracts, they signed Jordan Romano. That was a nice deal to go ahead and get done. They signed Max Kepler. They went out and they traded for Jesus Luzardo. And then they signed Joe Ross. I almost called him Jeff Ross, and I almost called him John Ross. Jeff Ross is a comedian. John Ross is a football wide receiver. Joe Ross is such a very common sounding name, but he may not be a common arm, a swing man that can help you out. So the Phillies have done stuff. They've made some moves. They also signed some guys to some minor league deals, and we know that they've brought guys up in the past from that and got stuff out of it. Jeff Hoffman was originally on a minor league deal, who we're going to talk about here, spoiler alert, in the top free agents left list. But who could the Philadelphia Phillies target next? Because they're not done, right? I can guarantee you, 100% certainty, that there will be another roster move that affects the major league roster between now and spring training. I don't know what that is. I have a couple of ideas, and we're going to talk about that in our second segment, but it could be a signing of another top-level free agent. Now, it won't be Corbin Burnes. Corbin Burnes, get in the bag. Of course, he went to Baltimore via trade and then was a free agent this year, and he ends up going to the Arizona Diamondbacks. And that's a big-time deal for them. It's a big-time signing. Corbin Burnes, absolutely unbelievable. Won the NL Cy Young, 2 years ago? And he has been just outstanding for a while now. So Arizona, they're kind of one of those weird, they're not really contenders, but that's not a team that you want to see get better because you don't want any more contenders in the National League, with the Mets getting Juan Soto and the Dodgers obviously being stacked. Teoscar Hernandez, by the way, while we talk about the Dodgers, goes back to the Dodgers. So that's another outfielder off the market for the Philadelphia Phillies to consider. It was always kind of assumed that he was going to end up back in LA, and why would you not? They won the World Series. They have Shohei. They have Freddie Freeman. They have Mookie Betts. They are a stacked team. They look poised to compete for basically ever. And so that's another guy off the board. But who are some of the guys that are big-time names that are still out there. We've mentioned this guy a couple times with the first name on this list. And shout out to Yahoo Sports and Eric Mullen, who put this list together of like the top guys. I'm going to read through and give you some of my takes on the names, but he did compile this list, so credit to him. Pete Alonso is the first name on here. And there was a conversation that we've had in the past about when suitors drop off, it becomes more likely that a guy goes back to his former team. There were reports recently that Pete Alonso and the New York Mets are not close on figuring out a way for him to return. We'll see if that changes. That doesn't mean there's no chance he goes back to the Mets, which we've talked about would be bad for the Philadelphia Phillies. But Pete Alonso is probably the biggest name left out on the market at this point as far as where they're at in their career. We're also going to talk about, are these guys fits for the Philadelphia Phillies or not? Pete Alonso, not a fit for the Philadelphia Phillies. He would not play, like neither of the positions he would play, first or DH, are open positions for the Phillies. Harper, Schwarber take those spots. The best thing you can look for Alonso, do not go to the New York Mets. Next guy on this list, Alex Bregman, absolutely a fit for the Philadelphia Phillies if they do end up trading Alec Boehm. Now, that's a big if, and that becomes a bigger if by the day. The closer you get to the actual spring training starting and the season starting, the less likely it is that you have this framework for this major deal for an all-star starter. It just doesn't – I don't want to say it doesn't seem likely, right? Because if I had to guess, I would say it's like 52-48 in favor of Alec Boehm being traded. Not my opinion of what the Phillies should do, my opinion of what the Phillies would do. I think it's still slightly more likely than not that Alec Boehm is not on this team next year, but that number dwindles every day in favor of him moving. So if he is indeed traded, though, Alex Bregman would be the clear top option for the Philadelphia Phillies at third base. And that interest has been expressed very clearly by the Philadelphia Phillies through reports and rumors. I mean, it's not a well-kept secret that the Philadelphia Phillies, if they have an opening at third base, would want Alex Bregman to fill it. So he's still out there. That has not changed. That's a good thing because the Phillies dragging their feet on the Alec Boehm trade, or rather maybe not getting the return they might have wanted in potential Alec Boehm trades, is something of note that if Alex Bregman signs, that gets much tougher to replace Boehm to the level that he plays at. Bregman's still available. Jack Flaherty, we talked about. He's a guy that I'm interested in as far as his ability to throw. But, I mean, the guy is a starting pitcher, and you're looking at a situation where you traded for Jesus Luzardo. When we talked Jack Flaherty previously, it was before you rounded out your rotation. So I don't think Flaherty really makes sense. You already got the swingman and Ross that we talked about. So he's a guy that could step into the starting rotation if injury happens. So could Andrew Painter. Your rotation looks pretty darn set at this point. So not an option for the Philadelphia Phillies in my mind anymore. The next name on this list, a familiar one, our guy Jeff Hoffman. I would love to see Jeff Hoffman back. It's wild to me that he has not signed yet, but I think the interesting part of that is his market is so weird. Some teams think he's a starter. Some teams think he's a reliever. Because of that, the value changes significantly based on deals he's probably getting or conversations he's having from different teams. So he's got to decide, one, do I want to start or do I want to relieve? Now, he probably wants to start because with that comes a significant pay raise and a significant up in the prestige of his position. Like, guys want to start. I'll tell you, listen, if you're throwing in the bullpen, you probably wanted to be a starter at some point. That's just kind of how most guys work. Now, there's some guys that's just like, I wanted to be a reliever. Reliever fits for me, and they've done that since high school or college. But most guys, if you're pitching at the major league level in any capacity, your original goal was to be a starter. So he could do that, but if he wants to, and the Phillies, again, starting rotation set. If he wants to come back to the Philadelphia Phillies, though, and be a reliever, he'd absolutely be a fit. And I'm sure the Phillies are still interested in bringing him back, but they clearly started to make moves outside of the Jeff Hoffman stuff, bringing in multiple bullpen arms and a guy that has closed in the past in Jordan Romano. For all the Jeff Hoffman stuff, the Carlos Estevez stuff is rather similar, just without the potential starter quotient of the equation. Carlos Estevez could come back if the Phillies want to spend more on the bullpen, but it seems like the Phillies are shoring up everything first. And then if one of those guys wants to be added, you'll find room for Jeff Hoffman or Carlos Estevez. It doesn't seem likely that they are still major targets for the Philadelphia Phillies. They could come back, but it'll have to be, hey, we didn't really get the market that we were expecting from other teams, and we want to play for a contender and a winner. and we're comfortable with Philadelphia, so we'll be back. That would be the way that they end up here. Hassan Kim is the next name on here. Infielder. Doesn't really make sense for the Philadelphia Phillies. He's going to be a starter. The Phillies don't have an open infield spot besides at third base, and Bregman is the preferred option there. This is an interesting name. Jurickson Profar, versatile defender, can play outfield, can play infield, solid bat. He's a guy that is still available. And at 31 in 2024, all-star, capable guy. This would mean that Max Kepler becomes a depth option in the outfield at the Phillies. And Jurickson Profar would start somewhere in the corners, I would say. And then, well, actually, no, you could probably start somebody in center, whether it's Kepler or Profar. It won't be Castellanos. All due respect to Nick, not a center fielder. And then your depth pieces would be Marsh and Rojas, which would make you feel better about that. And possible. Anyone who's an outfielder on this list is a possible fit for the Philadelphia Phillies, just like Anthony Santander, who is the next option. Less likely because he's a higher profile name, I would say, with that power, hitting over 40 bombs last year. And that's a guy that's probably going to command more than the Phillies want to spend. The tough thing with paying an outfielder now is you don't know if you're going to have to pay Bregman at third base, so you don't know what your price point is. But both of those guys, if you work out the Alec Boehm thing and figure out what you're doing at third base in 2025, could be fits for the Philadelphia Phillies. Names to consider. Roki Sasaki, not a name that the Philadelphia Phillies seem to be in on. He is the guy getting posted from Japan, of course. Young stud, 23-year-old pitcher. And, yeah, he's a monster, but he's probably going to end up a Dodger. Let's not kid ourselves. Tanner Scott's an interesting one. This is another bullpen arm here, and we've only got two more names left on this list. But Tanner Scott's very interesting as a lefty bullpen arm that could be a safer, well, not a safer option, but a slightly more attainable option than Jeff Hoffman and Carlos Estevez. Actually, he's probably on that Carlos Estevez tier, but he's a guy that was an all-star in 2024. He's a guy that could really help out the Phillies bullpen. The question is, he's got closing experience. Do you want like multiple guys with closing experience? And then one of those guys has to step into a lesser role. That would be a conversation to have, but bullpen spots still potentially available for the Phillies. That's a guy to keep an eye on. The last guy is an absolute not, and it's Justin Verlander that's on this list. You just don't need a starter. And I also, I don't really want a 42-year-old starter, 41 turning 42. Yeah, I'm good on Justin Verlander. Great name, Hall of Fame resume. No need for the Philadelphia Phillies to acquire the services of Justin Verlander. So that's some of the big names still available. It gives you an idea. There are still some big names out there. There are still some guys that can make differences on this team that you look at. So if you're getting like kind of antsy of, well, what can the Phillies do next? Is the market drying up? There's still some big names available. And the Phillies are undoubtedly not done in some capacity flipping around this roster. Now, flipping around this roster or big moves, there's a major difference. So coming up next, we're going to talk about whether or not we should expect any more big moves from the Philadelphia Phillies as the offseason continues. That's our next topic as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about Rocket Money first, because Rocket Money is absolutely must-have. Maybe your New Year's resolution is working out more, or maybe it's eating better, whatever. Everybody's New Year's resolution is different outside of one thing. Everybody should want to 100% save more money in the new year, and Rocket Money can help you do that because it's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. That's what we're talking about with the New Year's resolutions. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year. Could you imagine what you do with an extra $740 in your pocket in 2025 when using all of the app's premium features? So they've got a lot of great stuff, but for me, one of the best features on there is the subscription tracker that keeps you updated on what you're using, what you're not using, helps you cancel stuff that you might have even forgotten about. You can set goals in there so you can keep your New Year's resolutions if it is to save money, and it should be. I mean, they're the best. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Again, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Okay, so should the Phillies make any more big moves? Well, sure, should. Yes, they should go out and sign everybody. John Middleton should empty his pockets. He should be poor for the rest of his life and spend it all on this baseball team. but that's not realistic. And come on, like, we're not asking him to do that. The Philadelphia Phillies have committed a lot of money, or rather, John Middleton has committed a lot of money to this team, and a lot of stuff is really set. So how realistic is it at this point, as we sit here on December 30th, 2024, to say there's another big move or a couple big moves coming for the Philadelphia Phillies? Strangely, it's actually pretty realistic to say that. And the biggest reason is you're still shopping an all-star caliber player. And I told you earlier on in this episode that I believe that it's still more likely than not, slightly, very slightly, more likely than not, that Alec Boehm is not a member of the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025. Part of me looks at that situation and says there's too much smoke, got to be some kind of fire. And when you're close to that fire, like Alec Boehm is, sometimes that makes it a very uncomfortable situation, just to continue with the smoke and fire analogy. He may not want to be here if the Philadelphia Phillies were so actively shopping him, or maybe still are. It may be best for both sides that it's a fresh start, and we've discussed that multiple times throughout the offseason as we talk about potential Alec Boehm trades. That is still very much up in the air, and that would be a major move. That wouldn't just be like a big move for the Phillies. Like, that would be big baseball news. The Jesus Luzardo trade, right, that the Philadelphia Phillies got done for a couple prospects. And that was a move that it wasn't really like big baseball news. It was big Phillies news. Now it's big for the team because with their rotation, that makes them really, really strong in the starting pitching department when they were already really, really strong. But this would be like everybody would zone in on, where's Alec Boehm going? What are the Phillies getting back? How are they retooling stuff? Because this would be an atypical move by a franchise that's competing, but it's one that the Phillies clearly at some point, and maybe still do, believe is necessary for this team to get over the hump that they've been on of not winning a World Series, but getting pretty darn close. So, yeah, you should expect, potentially expect, I guess. I know I'm sitting on the fence here, but I kind of have to be, because it's a coin flip almost whether or not Alec Boehm will be moved, in my opinion. But there's a lot of teams out there right now at this point in the offseason that there are no more coin flips on big moves. Either they've done something and they're locked into what they did, or they haven't done something and they're not going to because they're a lesser market team, a cheap owner. They don't need to do anything big. There's all of those different factors. But the Philadelphia Phillies are still one of a handful of teams in baseball that have irons in the fire in a big way. Outside of the Alec Boehm situation, though, is where this gets interesting. Is there another big signing going on, and not one tied to Boehm? Because I'm going to put like the potential of Alex Bregman into that Boehm bucket. Because if you move a third baseman, you have to acquire a third baseman. And that all fits into the whole, like, is there still a big move coming conversation? Like, that's all on one side, and it's all fit in with the Alec Boehm, will he, won't he be traded? Do I see the Phillies acquiring another outfielder that's impactful? We talked about Jurickson Profar. We talked about Anthony Santander. It could be as part of the Alec Boehm trade. Hey, who knows? Like, honestly, at this point, if you're moving Alec Boehm, you should probably look to get an outfielder back. We already said outfielder or bullpen would seem to make the most sense for the Philadelphia Phillies. So, yeah, I mean, there's that. And there's also, like, and tomorrow's episode is going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about what the lineup would look like for the Philadelphia Phillies right now, building the ideal lineup and rotation for the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025 with the players you currently have, with Jesus Luzardo accounted for, Max Kepler accounted for, a lot of the changes that have been made with the Philadelphia Phillies. We're going to just get a look at what the team would look like if you didn't make any major moves. And it may leave a little bit to be desired, because your outfield on opening day is Max Kepler, Nick Castellanos, and either Johan Rojas or Brandon Marsh. That's going to be a situation where you say, I still look at that as a average major league outfield. And this team is capable of putting together a better than average major league outfield based on the market size, based on the payroll, based on the want to win, the championship contention. Like, you need to put that together. You've got Juan Soto in the outfield in New York. You have Aaron Judge in the outfield in New York. You have so many great players, like Shohei Ohtani could be back in the outfield at points for the Los Angeles Dodgers, depending on how he recovers from Tommy John surgery. There are some great outfielders on contending teams around baseball. And the Philadelphia Phillies don't exactly have that, all due respect to Nick Castellanos, who had a great year last year. He's not in the conversation with those names that I just ran through. So I would like to see the Phillies add to the outfield. I don't know if they're that's the thing. It's so hard to determine what they want to do because they don't know what they can do yet. They haven't moved on to that. They don't know where they have to spend their money because the Alec Boehm deal is not getting. This is the big major roadblock for the 2024-2025 offseason is like figure out what you're doing with Alec Boehm. Blank or get off the pot, as the old expression goes. And I'm not going to say the first word. This is a family show, all right? We keep it clean here on Locked On Phillies. But you understand what I'm saying. They got to make this call. And the sooner they make it, the better, because the more they can figure out what they want to do and they can figure out what their price point. If you don't move Alec Boehm and you set aside money for Alex Bregman, you could easily go out and get Jurickson Profar. You could easily go out and get Anthony Santander. You could go add these guys, some top-level outfield free agents that are available, and say, hey, we're going to just super stack our outfield because we had money set aside. We saved it for a rainy day, and that rainy day never came. So let's go on vacation to Cancun, right? Doesn't that sound more fun? Like, that's what the Phillies could do, but they've got to make their decision first. And it's hard because it takes two to tango, and you're looking at a trade situation that is significantly more difficult than they planned on it being to work out. So all of this to say, I think we should expect another big move from the Philadelphia Phillies because this feels like an unresolved situation for the offseason. What that big move will be, it's one of two things. Either they're going to spend the money that they have set aside to replace Alec Boehm at third base via Alex Bregman. I almost said via free agency, but might as well just say via Alex Bregman. Or they're going to use that money and go acquire a top-level outfielder or a top-level reliever. Just makes sense. They got to do one of those two things, in my opinion. And if they just sit around and do nothing and don't spend that money, that would be something that I would be upset with them for. So I think they're going to do it or do something of that ilk, and we will see. But the offseason ain't done, and the big news we have to react to here on Locked On Phillies is not done for the pre-spring training portion of this offseason. And what is that pre-spring training portion of the offseason? Well, we haven't really taken a look at some of the big dates around baseball because we're kind of in that dead zone. But when the new year gets rolling, we're going to have some dates to keep an eye on of like what's next in the Major League Baseball offseason as the picture of rosters begin to take shape. We will talk about the significant dates left in the 2024-2025 offseason. I can only say that for one more day, then it'll just be the 2025 offseason. But we'll talk about the big dates to know and why they're impactful for the Philadelphia Phillies coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. All right, so the big dates for the offseason, the last big thing that happened for the MLB offseason calendar was December 11th, which was the Rule 5 draft. And now on December 30th, we've kind of just been looking at signings and trades for the last couple weeks. But that's going to change coming up on January 9th. So we got another week or so to chill and enjoy the start of the new year. January 9th, though, is the deadline for arbitration filing. So that's when teams are going to have their figures, teams and players, submitted for arbitration to figure out contracts for those players. The Phillies have a couple. We'll dive deeper into that when the salaries are submitted and who's submitting what and everything like that. But the arbitration process next step is on January 9th. So that's something to keep an eye on just for salary numbers. Not that it matters too much for the Philadelphia Phillies because, like I've been saying this whole episode, major market team, John Middleton will spend. They're not going to get like their pockets turned out by anybody in arbitration. They got plenty of money to pay for these guys. So it's not like this $30 million figure in arbitration for a player that's going to decide whether or not you can sign more free agents. The Phillies will be just fine. It'll just be something we keep an eye on just to have an idea of where guys are being paid. January 15th is another interesting date. International signing period opens. And that's going to be something that opens up the opportunity for Roki Sasaki. It also opens up the situation for other players that this is something where you look at more like minor league deals and you look at prospects, guys that you found over the year that are playing outside the country that you want to bring into your organization. Some big time names in the future can be added after this period, but we're not really going to know who they are now. It's not like there's this starting outfielder that's playing in some other league around the world that you're going to go out and get on January 15th, but it is a time that creates activity because it allows you to sign international players. January 21st, Hall of Fame class is going to be announced. We'll keep an eye on guys like Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley and see if they have any more luck this time around when it comes to the Hall of Fame. We'll do episodes on that as we start to get an idea of where the ballots are going. So as we get closer to that date, we'll do some Hall of Fame shows for sure. It'd be nice to see those two guys who are big parts of the 2008 squad get into the Hall. Arbitration hearings are from January 27th to February 14th. So that'll be the time period when those numbers that were submitted on the 9th start to be handled by an independent arbiter. So a judge will look at the numbers. They'll decide what's fair. If there's a middle point, if there's a player's numbers fair, team's numbers fair, they'll figure that out between then. So that's when the salaries will actually be worked down for that. And then you're going to have pitchers and catchers starting to report in February. So we only have 4 more major dates in the Philadelphia Phillies, in the Major League Baseball offseason, really, for all teams. We're getting closer. Crazy. Off the top of my head, I haven't really looked at pitchers and catchers reporting yet. If you're watching on YouTube, you see I've got my Eagles Kelly Green starter jacket on. I got my Eagles champions hat on. I'm in football mode over on the radio right now, and I know this is a baseball podcast, but if you're a Philadelphia sports fan and you're an Eagles fan too, you know why we got plenty to focus on the gridiron. By the way, go ahead and check out the folks on Locked On Eagles. I'm sure they've got a banger of a show today to do that. So you can make that your next listen and continue to support the Locked On Podcast Network. They do great work over there. But I haven't really turned my attention to like pitchers and catchers, spring training, any of that yet. We'll get to that when we get to that. It's not even the new year yet, but something that is coming sooner rather than later. You can't stop the marching of time, and we are drawing slowly, like I said, closer to that being a reality. There's still a lot of stuff to work out between that time. Of those dates, the biggest date that I'd keep an eye on for the Philadelphia Phillies, like the date that matters the most, is probably none of them. Like, I don't even know what to say. Like, I want to give you something juicy where I'm going to say, oh, here's why the arbitration figures deadline on January 9th is going to be a big thing for them. It's not. Here's why the international signings is a big opportunity for them. I mean, it is, but not anything that will affect like this year's roster. Like, you could argue that the Hall of Fame class being announced is going to be the biggest of these big days for the Philadelphia Phillies, because they have a couple of guys that are eligible for the Hall of Fame. Like, outside of that, all the work the Philadelphia Phillies can do is in the margins of in between these dates. Like, free agency will still continue. Trades are still available. You can still do all of the work that the Phillies have been doing throughout the offseason to figure out the Bohm stuff and other signings and things like that. But there's no, like, this is when it's going to happen. The winter meetings have already gone by. You've already gotten through some of the points where the actions of teams are spurred on by owners getting together or by deadlines or by things like that. It's not really a thing anymore. Rule 5 draft's done. We are into the second half, well into the second half of actually, you know what? I did just see a post recently that said something like, we have reached the baseball solstice or baseball winter solstice, which is the point in between the final pitch of the World Series and the start of, I guess, spring training or the next season or whatever the case may be. But we're like into the second half now slightly of the baseball offseason. So you've gotten most of the way there. I was looking at this will just be something nice. This has nothing to do with like the Philadelphia Phillies, but it also has everything to do with the Philadelphia Phillies if you're a baseball fan. I like to look up the sunset times in Philadelphia. And we're at a point where the sunset's starting to get later in the day rather than earlier. It's still setting before 5 p.m. But like, the closer we get to long days and daylight savings turning back and everything like that and getting warmer, it felt like the weather felt great this weekend, like early season baseball weather. Like, we're getting there, folks. So we've still got some long months ahead of us. But a nice move or two by the Philadelphia Phillies to hold us over in that time would be great. Not just because I have to put out content. The Phillies haven't really been doing that much over the past couple of days, but because it'll remind us that baseball, it's right around the corner and we're all going to get there. We just have to be patient, and not just with the calendar, but also with the Philadelphia Phillies and their front office and what they could still do, because as we talked about earlier in the episode, probably another big move or two coming for the Philadelphia Phillies. Just talking generally, big moves compared to what they've already done this offseason. So before the end of the new year, we got a couple more episodes coming out before New Year's Day. So both these will come out on New Year's Eve tomorrow. We're going to do that lineup thing that I was talking about, where we talk about the projected lineup right now by yours truly for the Philadelphia Phillies as the roster currently stands, and how that roster looks, and if we should feel good about that. And we're going to do the starting rotation as well, which will be interesting based on the spots that I put the guys. And then we're going to have our year in review show, which is going to be crazy to do. There's a lot of stuff that happened this past year for the Philadelphia Phillies, from the signings that they did in the offseason leading into the 2024 season, to the season they had, to the ups and downs, to the playoff exit, to the big-time offseason that they find themselves in the middle of. The year in review for the Philadelphia Phillies is going to be It's going to be interesting to see. I don't even know where I'm going to go mentally when I try and evaluate if this was a successful year for the Philadelphia Phillies, or rather to what extent this was a successful year. Obviously not ultimately successful, no World Series, but how positively or negatively should we feel about this past calendar year for the Philadelphia Phillies? And we'll do some New Year's resolutions as well. So a lot of good end of year content coming your way here from Locked On Phillies over the next couple of days. But that's all for today's episode. So thank you again for checking us out. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to this in podcast form, hitting that subscribe button on the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel. And I will talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.